From revolvers to rhymes, a doctor who turned an outlaw's skin into boots, a thief who left poems in the safes he looted. Between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, the Wild West went beyond the dust of the roads and became the stage for feats as unlikely as they were irresistible. Dive into 25 stories full of bravery, eccentricity, and surprises, and understand why this frontier still fuels movies, series, and songs. Number 1. You might think the Wild West has already given up all its secrets, but the story of George Big Nose Parrott proves otherwise. Hanged by a mob in 1881, the outlaw became raw material for the boldness of Dr. John Eugene Osborne, who years later would become the governor of Wyoming. From the bandit's skin came a pair of boots he wore on Inauguration Day, and a briefcase that made the rounds in political circles, sparking whispers about the accessory's dark past. The skull had an even stranger fate. Sawed in half, it served as an ashtray, doorstop, and pencil holder in the office of Lillian Held, the state's first female doctor. To top it off, Osborne and his colleague Thomas Mackey examined Parrott's brain for anatomical clues to criminal behavior. Every repurposed fragment kept alive a story that, the more grotesque it was, the more it captivated anyone who heard it. Number 2. John Wesley Hardin, a gunslinger from the Wild West, made history by telling a jury he had killed 41 men. After spending over 2 decades in prison, he met his end in 1895, shot in the back at a saloon in El Paso by John Selman. But one incident had already marked him back in 1877. That night in Abilene, Kansas, after cards and whiskey, Hardin lay down in a hotel room next to a farmer named Charles Huger. The sound of snoring through the wall woke him up. When his request for quiet got no response, he raised his revolver and fired through the wood. Huger died without waking, and Hardin lay back down, surrounded by the smell of gunpowder. Number 3. On the banks where Clear Creek meets the Brazos River, Fort Griffin rose, a constant becoming of the Wild West. Its wooden buildings and saloons echoed with the footsteps of cowboys driving cattle, gunslingers building their reputations, buffalo hunters loaded with hides, fugitives looking for shade, gamblers betting their last coin, and women setting the pace of the night. The mix of all these worlds earned it the nickname Babylon on the Brazos. John Wesley Hardin could intimidate with just a look, while Doc Holliday turned cards and a revolver into an art form, always followed by Kate, the famous Big Nose Kate. Every sunset brought a new bet, a duel, or a story that fired up the imagination of anyone passing through. Number 4. Have you ever heard of a bandit who recited poetry between robberies? Charles E. Bowles, better known as Black Bart, traded gold mines for roadside verse. Born in England and raised in New York since 1831, he saw the 1849 gold rush as a call to head west. It was in California that his name began echoing through saloon ballads. Bart targeted Wells Fargo stagecoaches, cracked open the safes with precision, and left behind a rhymed note on the emptied metal, sealing the act like a dark autograph. Through 28 heists, he kept his reputation spotless, until a short stint in prison showed him the cost of fame. Once released, he hung up his bandana, returned to New York, and ended his life in 1917, far from the dust and steel of the trails. Number 5. A wagon pulls up in front of the dusty saloon. Soon the owner holds up an amber bottle they call FireWater. He drips the liquid onto the lamp's coals, and the flame jumps high, drawing murmurs from the gathered locals. There's no classic recipe in this whiskey. Raw alcohol, burnt sugar, and chewing tobacco make up a mix that burns your throat and pounds in your temples. Across the frontier, folks say a single sip can make even the steadiest gunslinger wobble on his stool. Sweat on his brow and a shaky hand hovering over the holster. Anyone bold enough to try it understands in seconds why this is the most feared elixir in the entire West. Number 6. When the smoke from the shootout in Oklahoma cleared in 1911, train robber Elmer J. McCurdy lay dead, with no family to claim him. Funeral home owner Joseph L. Johnson saw an unusual business opportunity. He dressed the body like an outlaw, wedged a rifle in its stiff arms, and started charging a penny to anyone who wanted to stare at the bandit frozen in time. Years later, two men showed up claiming to be Elmer's brothers. Johnson, already content with his earnings, handed over the corpse, but they were actually owners of a traveling carnival. The dead man became a sideshow attraction, going from town to town, until he was left in a warehouse in Los Angeles. It wasn't until 1949 that someone realized the dummy was actually a real person. Even then, it would take another 27 years of bureaucratic mess before Elmer finally got a proper burial. Number 7. When it comes to robberies in the Wild West, the loudest echo usually belongs to Jesse James. But many say his brother Frank had the colder trigger finger. Together in the James Younger gang, they pulled off bloody heists and spread fear along the rails and roads. In 1882, after Jesse's downfall, Frank stepped down from the saddle and knocked on the Missouri governor's door. "I've spent my life on horseback without a single day of peace." He ended up acquitted, and for the next 30 years he traded gunpowder for modest jobs until his death in 1915. Number 8. James Killer Miller, the feared Deacon Jim, roamed the dusty plains of the Wild West, treating every town like a temporary stop. Indicted for 14 killings, but with rumors pointing to 50, he was also suspected of taking out Pat Garrett, the sheriff famous for bringing down Billy the Kid. The contrast was striking. The hand that handled a revolver also turned the pages of hymnals. Miller didn't drink, didn't smoke, and helped lead Methodist services. His air of invincibility grew after he survived 4 gunshots to the chest, protected by a steel plate hidden under his vest. That mix of public devotion and calculated violence spread legends from ranch to ranch, keeping whole crowds hooked on every tale. But in 1909, the tide turned. Faced with a mob hungry for justice, the hangman's noose tightened around the neck of the killer deacon, raising the question of what other shadows still haunted the West. Number 9. It was 1870. Among the dusty mountains between Elizabethtown and Taos, a simple shelter offered warmth to those crossing New Mexico. Welcoming the travelers was Charles Kennedy, an imposing figure with a thick beard, always alongside his wife Rose, who was born among the Ute. When a stranger stopped to rest, the couple's 5-year-old son approached him and whispered, "My father kills the people who come through here." Minutes later, gunshots cracked through the air. The guest fell, and to silence the warning, so did the boy. Kennedy gathered bags, watches, and other people's dreams. In the following weeks, every visitor who knocked on that cabin's door met the same fate, turning that trade route into a corridor of fear and darkness. Number 10. A dusty road cuts through 1870s Kansas. Alongside it, the Bender Inn offers hot soup and a soft bed to weary travelers. John greets guests at the door. Elvira watches from behind the counter. Katie smiles as she serves the meal. And John Jr. makes small talk to find out if anyone's expecting the guest at their next stop. Days go by. People vanish, and rumors of witchcraft spread, until neighbors organize a search. When they lift the floorboards of the cellar, they find shallow graves, blood-stained iron, and empty wallets. Shock turns to rage. The Benders are hunted down and killed, and the inn goes up in flames with Katie trapped inside. The echo of that crime travels through trails and saloons, a reminder that in the Wild West, the road could end before sunset. Number 11. In the dusty saloons of the Wild West, anyone betting chips at the poker tables knew luck could turn in a snap. Sitting with your back to the wall and eyes locked on the door became an unspoken rule. Clear view, easy escape. In 1876, at the Nutella and Manse in Deadwood, the famous gunslinger James Butler Wild Bill Hickok followed that ritual. He looked untouchable, chips neatly stacked, revolver within reach. Then Jack McCall slipped in through the back door, weaved between tables, and before anyone could react, a single shot took down the most feared figure in the West, plunging the saloon into a silence that hinted at more trouble ahead. Number 12. Mary Catherine Harney, nicknamed Big Nose Kate, traded the comfort of a wealthy childhood for a string of hard knocks. Orphaned young, she ended up with a foster family that gave her little more than a roof. Widowed before 30, she headed to Texas, danced in saloons, and sold pleasure to survive. That's where she crossed paths with Doc Holliday, a dentist turned gunslinger and card sharp. Their connection sparked bold plans. He saw in Kate a rare kind of courage, and she saw in him a chance to push even bigger boundaries. When Holliday landed in the hands of the law, Kate didn't flinch. She set fire to a nearby barn, drew the crowd to the blaze, and distracted the sheriff just long enough to free her lover, changing the course of both their legends once again. Number 13. In the Wild West, the bandana wasn't just for show. It went hand in hand with the hat, the pistol, and the horse, facing whatever challenges popped up along the trail. Pulled up over the face, it worked as a dust filter from the cattle drives. Tied around the neck, it blocked out the brutal sun. Wrapped around the hands, it became a glove to grab a steaming pot from the fire. When the cold cut through the night, you could just wrap it around your ears to warm back up. But that same piece of cloth could switch roles in a heartbeat. Raise it up to your eyes, and an honest cowboy turned into an anonymous shadow at a bank door or aiming at a stagecoach. Between the jingle of spurs, the bandana became a survival tool, shaped by the land, the weather, and the will of whoever wore it. A kind of versatility that made every fold a story waiting to be told. Number 14. When the Ivers family landed in the United States in 1865, young Alice traded her English boarding school uniform for the red dust of Colorado. Among laughter, clinking glasses, and cigar smoke in the saloons, she discovered a new alphabet, the one written in cards. At the bar owned by Bob Ford, the same man who took down Jesse James, Alice sharpened her mind by reading faces, finger taps, and the kind of pauses that cost chips. She soon earned the nickname Poker Alice and turned her charm into a bluff. She'd tilt her hat, flash a smile, and let her rival's arrogance open the door for her bets. One night she raked in $6,000, enough to buy a whole street out west. Word spread along the rail lines, and gambling houses filled up any time her name hit the posters. But fame and danger drink from the same glass. In 1910, now the owner of her own saloon, an argument with a soldier turned into a gunshot. Cards froze mid-air, the crowd pulled back, and Alice walked out in handcuffs, under the whispers she herself had set in motion. Number 15. Have you ever heard of the young Canadian girl who traded a quiet home life for the ruthless Wild West? Pearl Hart was just 17 when, mesmerized by a Buffalo Bill show, she decided to head for Arizona. There she met Joe Wood. Their honeymoon turned into a robbery partnership. In 1899, the couple stopped a stagecoach in the middle of the dust, took the money, and made headlines. But the same desert that had been their hiding place came back to bite them. They got lost and were caught days later. Pearl became a rare statistic in the Wild West, the second woman to ever rob a stagecoach, but the first to live through it. Sentenced, she served only 18 months. Jails weren't even built to hold women. She walked out pardoned, already wearing the mantle of a living legend. Number 16. Galloping across dry plains, rugged mountains, and unpredictable rivers, Pony Express riders covered 1,950 miles between St. Joseph, Missouri and Sacramento in just 10 days, a feat that's still impressive today. To keep up that breakneck pace, each station, set about 12 miles apart, kept a fresh horse and a rider ready to go. As soon as the hooves gave out, the mail switched to a new mountain rider, in a smooth choreography that kept the letters moving day and night. Launched in 1860 to deliver mail and newspapers to a growing nation, the service aimed to beat the slow stagecoaches. But despite instant popularity, it didn't last long. 18 months was all it took for a $110,000 deficit to bring it down. The government stuck with traditional methods, and the telegraph line, stretching farther each week, was already turning those riders into legends before they even hung up the reins. Number 17. In 1856, the U.S. War Department was looking for a straight-shot solution to a huge problem: crossing miles of scorching sand in the Southwest without wearing out horses or men. Why not trade hooves for wide feet, the strategists wondered. The idea came from across the ocean, where Ottoman and Egyptian troops already relied on camels. 66 of them landed in Indianola and marched to Camp Verde, Texas, quickly proving their worth. They could go for days with little water and carry loads heavier than mules. But there was one detail the reports didn't mention. Under the saddle, a camel doesn't act like a gentle horse. It groans, spits, lies down when it feels like it. And when it catches a whiff of livestock, it lets out screams that scare off recruits. With confusing routes and frustrated officers, the Civil War broke out. Funding dried up, and the project was scrapped. Some camels were sold to circuses. Others escaped into the desert and became legends on Western maps. Number 18. Among the Apaches, taking an enemy's scalp wasn't just brutal. It was a living badge of courage, displayed in the center of the village so everyone could see who had mastered the art of war. When white settlers pushed across the plains, they saw the psychological impact of the act and made it part of their own playbook, spreading the practice into new territories and leaving fear in their wake at every frontier. By the time of the Civil War, the setting had changed, but the brutality only escalated. Confederate fighter William Bloody Bill Anderson led guerrillas who turned entire towns into scenes of terror, where scalping became a bloody calling card of control and a grim warning to anyone who dared fight back. Number 19. Have you ever heard of a flame that suddenly appears dancing on the tips of flagpoles or cattle horns? St. Elmo's fire shows up when storm electricity tears through the air, ionizing molecules and sparking a glowing blue-green light that flickers in the wind. For old-time sailors, that glow was a sign of a safe path ahead. But out on the prairies of the Wild West, that same light gave the herd a ghostly look. Cattle with little arcs of light on their heads, horses perking up their ears as the flame raced through their manes. Weathered cowboys held their breath, afraid that spark from the sky was a warning of chaos on the way. All it took was one lightning strike to turn silence into a stampede. Number 20. In old westerns, the camera almost always follows a white cowboy riding into the sunset. But the real picture was a lot more diverse. 1 in every 4 cowboys was black. And far from the movie screens, these men kept the big ranches running. They drove cattle along grueling trails, branded and shoed the herd, broke wild horses, and showed off their skills at the rodeos that popped up at local fairs. During the Civil War, with landowners off fighting, enslaved people took over the management of the land and looked after the livestock on their own. When the war ended and slavery was abolished, many of them already knew the job inside and out and kept working as free men, wearing the hat and holding the reins as symbols of their newly earned independence. Even though they had a huge impact on Western culture, their presence almost vanished from popular stories. But it still lives on in the tracks that crossed the prairie. Number 21. In the Wild West, a bounty hunter only got paid after proving the outlaw was dead. Before cameras, that meant tying the body to a horse and riding through days of dust to reach the sheriff's office. A grueling, stomach-turning trip, like the one Clint Eastwood showed in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But once photography reached the frontier, everything changed. All it took was getting the body to the local studio, propping it up against a wall, snapping the shutter, and heading back with a single glass plate. That instant proof cut the journey short, convinced the authorities, and secured the payout before the body hit the floor. Number 22. In the Wild West, walking through saloon doors meant stepping into no man's land. Between poker tables and shots of cheap whiskey, travelers, miners, and gunslingers all shared the same space, and one wrong look could spark a shootout. Movies showed saloons with chandeliers and pianos, but the first ones were makeshift shacks, built from creaky boards that groaned in the wind. Even so, they became the heart of growing towns, a place for quick deals, hot gossip, and high-stakes clashes. The Long Branch Saloon, now a tourist spot in Kansas City, stands as a symbol of that era. The building you see isn't the original. That one burned down in 1895. The rebuild kept the legend alive, and anyone who pushes through those swinging doors can still feel the echo of the footsteps that wrote some of the Wild West's tensest chapters. Stick around, because the stakes only get higher. Number 23. When the sun dipped low over the northern plains, one name echoed through the Lakota camps: Tatanka Iotanka, Sitting Bull. More than a warrior, he understood that strong beliefs could be just as sharp as a spear. Facing off against U.S. generals, he demanded respect for sacred lands and reminded them that every hunted buffalo deserved gratitude, not greed. Still, the blue columns marched on. After years of resistance, Sitting Bull laid down his rifle and was confined to a reservation. To support his family, he accepted a 4-month contract with Buffalo Bill's show. Riding his horse, he paraded through packed arenas across North America and Europe, where crowds cheered the chief, who symbolized the Wild West. But the spotlight's glow couldn't hide the tightening noose around his people. Unwilling to bow to the white man's way of life, he left the show behind and returned to the prairie, determined to keep the memory of a free nation alive. Number 24. In the Wild West, saddles creaked louder than women's voices. On every dusty street, 3 men vied for the attention of one woman, and during the California Gold Rush, that ratio jumped to 9. Holding rare space in a man's world, women found their stage in the saloons. They sang, slapped their skirts on the floorboards, and struck up well-rehearsed chatter, not to show affection, but to keep the drinks and coins flowing. Between rounds of whiskey, they built a quiet authority. They knew the customers by name, read their moods, and steered the night like true masters of ceremony. Not all of them sold pleasure. Some walked off their shift under respectful glances, like ladies setting the pace of a frontier still finding its rhythm. Number 25. Geronimo closes out this series as a symbol of both courage and contradiction. Born in the arid lands of Sonora, he grew up walking between borders and never accepted seeing his people fenced in. For decades, he crossed deserts, fought soldiers from both Mexico and the United States, and held firm in his belief that every mountain could still be free. When the bullets finally stopped, he laid down his rifle, but not his pride. He traded war for Christian faith and made a living with bows, arrows, and signed photographs, living reminders of a resistance that still echoes today. In the end, his story reminds us that the history of the West isn't just made of gunslingers and battalions, but of nations that, even in defeat, refuse to vanish. This journey brings together battles, victories, and sacrifices that helped shape the Wild West. If Geronimo's path stirred something in you, drop a comment about the Western movie, book, or game that's left the biggest mark on your life. Like and share this video with others who live for these stories, and hit subscribe to follow the next adventures. See you on the next trail.